The next slide will show you. We're recording this. I want to officially welcome you all. And as Liz said, we hope that you are by a window enjoying the sunshine. I'm joined by my colleague Liz Isaacs from Housing Innovations, and we have one of the CT Boss co-chairs here, Alice Minervino, who may chime in at some point, either with a question to answer questions or on one of the slides. If she has something to add, you're more than welcome to join in. I want to encourage you all, if you feel comfortable, if you're in a place that works, to put your cameras on. We just said it's so great to hear your voices, to have some human interaction, and it's great to see your faces as well. So if you feel comfortable and you're able, we love to see your faces if your camera's on, and if you don't, that's perfectly fine also. I think Liz sent an email with a link to the PowerPoint, so that is also on the CT Boss website. We want you all to know we will be using the poll function, so you can answer the question at any time. We'll read out the results when we use that. This webinar is scheduled from 10 to 11:30, and there are a lot of slides. There is a lot of material to get through. Some of it will go through quickly because it can be pretty dense, but the slides will always be there for your review should you wish to review them later. And we are going to post the recording within the next day or so to the CT Boss website if you want to refer to the video or share it with anybody else who wasn't able to attend. Liz?
And we really would love this to be interactive. I think we have 30 some odd people, but and we'll stop and keep saying, does someone have a question? But please unmute yourself and ask questions. So much of what we're going to go through is it's a little dry, a little dense, but lots of it is not intuitive. I sort of always talk about this work that, like, you try to use logic, then this must mean this. And so much of the HUD world and rules and regulations, just like, they aren't intuitive. So they're really, it's cliche, but there are no stupid questions. There's like, just please ask. And there's so many acronyms and phrases we throw around. And so we're trying to be mindful to not do that. But if we do that, stop us. And even if we don't do that, stop and ask a question, because our goal is that you leave today feeling comfortable saying, like, yeah, I think I know what the COC does. You're not going to need to know all of this. You can use the slides as reference to go back to, but this is really supposed to be helpful for you. So please ask questions and stop us and let us know what you need to know.
And either, again, unmute yourself, or you can use the chat box too, and I'll try to keep an eye on that to see your questions. Great. And the agenda is we're going to cover introductions and on the next slide, an overview of CT Boss as it exists now, the Connecticut Balance of State Continuum of Care. Then we'll go through core components of our homeless service system. We'll look at key partners, responsibilities of COC projects once they're awarded, some helpful resources, and some upcoming learning opportunities. Next slide. And next, we're going to do a poll. Let's see. All right, can you see the poll? We want to know who's on the webinar. Alice, just nod if you can see the poll. Okay, thank you.
There's a funny Zoom thing where I can't see the poll and she can only see part of what goes out. So, it takes 3 or 4 people to know if a poll is working.
Yeah. Okay, it looks like 54 plus people, or percent of people have voted. Just waiting for people to vote. 80%. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the polling and then share the results. So it looks like 61% are service provider staff, 3% local mental health authority staff, 3%, one person's fiscal staff, one person's the LMHA, 8% housing coordinators, and 31% are in other roles. Okay, thank you. learning objectives. So as I think Liz may have already covered this, but we do hope, we did conduct a survey, Housing Innovations conducted a survey to better understand the needs of the COC, and having a basic orientation or refresher was one of the top requests. So again, we hope you leave this morning knowing the responsibilities of the continuum of care, CT BOSS continuum of care, core components of our homeless system, the key partners and their roles, responsibilities of projects, and then where to find more information. Next slide. CT BOSS overview. Okay, next slide. So what is a continuum of care or a COC? We are a group of people coming together to prevent and end homelessness, and we cannot get funding, HUD funding, COC in particular funding, without having this group or organization of people according to HUD. So the COC program is designed to assist individuals, including unaccompanied youth and families who are experiencing homelessness. We are charged with providing the services needed to help these individuals move into transitional and permanent housing with a goal of long-term stability. The program is designed to promote community-wide planning using strategic use of resources to address homelessness. So bringing all these parties together and resources together and making the best use of all of our resources and funding. Improve coordination and integration with mainstream resources and other programs targeted to people experiencing homelessness, really pulling all the partners together. And then to also improve data collection and performance measurement, to allow each community to tailor its program to the particular strengths and challenges within that community. And there are 2 COCs in Connecticut, CT BOSS, which is most of the state, and then the very southwestern corner is Opening Doors Fairfield County COC. Next slide. The annual competition, you'll hear lots of talk. Sometimes we refer to this as the NOFA. HUD awards approximately $2.5 billion each year nationally through the annual COC competition, and COCs across the country compete with one another. It's a country-wide annual competition. So all of the COCs are, they rank and submit individual project applications in what's called a priority listing. So in that, we place projects in a list from highest to lowest priority as our COC decides for funding as described by each COC. And all project applications are reviewed by the COC prior to submitting, and submitting along with the consolidated application, which is an application where HUD asks us a whole bunch of questions about how we're performing, what we're doing with funding as a group. Bonus projects are additional projects which are usually available by HUD depending on how much funding is available. They're created by funds above and beyond what we usually receive or what we have received the previous year. And they're awarded to COCs to assist in achieving the goals of ending homelessness. Bonuses are based on COC scoring. So every COC is not always guaranteed a bonus. And in recent years, that's been a lot fewer COCs receiving bonuses than in previous years. So people or COCs with the higher scores have a greater chance of receiving bonus funding. So just a note on this past year, like everything else, this last year has not been normal for the COC competition. So because of COVID, last summer, they did not launch the COC competition. Instead, HUD automatically renewed all of our projects that we had received the previous year in CT BOSS. So the COC application and the project applications were not required, but we expect that competitive process to resume this year. HUD has said that that will happen. Next slide. Annual project ranking. So the project ranking order is decided by considering a number of factors, including the renewal evaluation score, what gaps exist in the system, and other strategic consideration. So for instance, according to this scoring formula, to some complicated algebraic formula that HUD created, it may make sense to put some projects other than other projects to ensure the highest likelihood of getting the most projects awarded. Reductions in homelessness and improvements in system performance measures, or in other words, our data and how we demonstrate the work that we do, is making a positive impact. So in us in our COC getting a higher score every year. So the higher projects, higher ranked projects are in tier 1. They get funded unless there's a significant error in the application. The lower projects, which is a much smaller percentage of projects, gets funded depending on the COC application score. So again, the higher the application score, the more of those tier 2 projects get awarded. And in fact, the last time there was a competition, everything in our tier 2 was awarded as well.
Hi, Shannon.
Yeah, Robert. Hi.
Yeah, this is Rob Ponchalotti. I'm from the Connecticut Department of Labor, so I'm extremely new to this. I think through workforce, WIOA, we've always supposed to have been a direct partner, but I don't think we've always connected directly. And so I'm just trying to understand, are we the only COC in Connecticut, or are there several COCs in Connecticut?
There's one other COC in Connecticut. There's a balance of state, which makes up a large percentage of the area of Connecticut. And then in the southwestern corner, there is Opening Doors Fairfield County. So Liz, it largely consists of Fairfield County, or is there more?
Yeah, it's just Fairfield County. And they do a very similar, they do exactly what we do in terms of doing the, we call it the NOFA, the Notice of Funding Availability. But then there are some specific requirements to BOSS and some specific requirements to ODFC. So their process might not look exactly like ours does, but we all have to follow, HUD guidelines and HUD timeline, et cetera.
Okay, and so depending on what state I'm in, I might find one, I might find hundreds of COCs, like if I'm in California, right? I would assume.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. So like the state of Rhode Island has 1, I think Florida has 17. And so it just depends on how folks want to coordinate. So I've been here since 2003, and I don't know, Alice has been around a long time too. We had, there was Waterbury, there was Danbury, there was Bristol. So once upon a time, there were lots of COCs in the state of Connecticut. And then slowly decided to come together for economy of scale. And it's, I think, been beneficial, frankly, in terms of funding and use of, resources to have that. But yes, it depends. So it depends what state you're in. And so while that looks different, everyone still goes through the same process that we do each year.
Okay, I'm sorry if I spoke out of turn or if everyone else has more experience, but I'm just coming in new and.
No, you know what? I think we maybe call this intro to the COC, but yeah, or between us, we always call it COC 101. So pretend you're in a 101 class and we're, defining what is criminal justice, what is biology, what is the COC. So please, please, please ask away.
Yeah.
And Robert, we in Connecticut, as Liz said, there was I think it started out with 13 or 15 continuum of care. And the reason they sort of all pooled together to become 2 is, as Liz said, economy of scale. So each COC has to apply to HUD. And so based on the funding and the way that it breaks down, the more cities and towns that got together, the bigger the pot of money was. And so you got a little bit more money and you could make it go a little bit further depending on the structure. So for me at Demas really worked on consolidating all the COCs into, the balance of state. And then in Fairfield County, they had their own separate COCs that they condensed into into one. So we really have two in Connecticut. And a lot of the work we do, even though we apply to HUD separately, we really try to work very closely with them so that we're kind of going forward as one state in model and in design. There's just a little, differences based on the way it's they have it structured. Like they don't call their continuum of care steering committee a steering committee. I think they call it, Lisa Callahan might know, I think they call it like the executive committee or something like that. So even though it's the same idea of a structure, it can be.
Thanks, Alice. No, that's great. I think it's good to give some context to.
Now the funding that comes in, one other question, and then I promise I'll be quiet for the rest.
Sure.
The funding
No,
that comes in, does it go from the federal government directly to the COCs, or is it handed out by an intermediary state agency like, our grants are with WIOA?
So a little of both. For the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services gets 40 some grants for permanent supportive housing. And then we give that out to private nonprofits. There are some private nonprofits that are funded directly for either permanent supportive housing or leasing or operating dollars, or rapid rehab, like, the various things they can apply for. Department of Housing is funded to do the rapid rehousing aspect of the work. So it varies, but so agencies can get funded directly or through the state agencies if they choose.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys taking time to answer my questions.
Oh, thank you for the questions. Everybody jump in, please.
Yes, thank you. All right, next slide, Liz. So this is a graph showing the results of our most recently completed competition, which was 2019. And you can see why CT BOSS did receive all of the funding in tier 1 and tier 2, because our score was 185 out of 2. This is out of 200. 185.5, and the highest score in the whole nation of every COC was on 186.5. So because of the work, the wonderful work that the providers do throughout Connecticut, and the data that shows the wonderful work that we do, we were able to score that well in the last competition. You can see the lowest score was 37.25, and then the weighted mean score, the middle of the road score, was 157. Right, next slide. CT BOSS funding, the 2020 award competition. So BOSS award amount was $46 million. So we received all of the renewals plus every bonus that we asked for. Opening doors, Fairfield County received $14.5 million. So that's a total of over $60 million in Connecticut. The funding activities that there are the activities you can see, and we'll go a little bit more into these project types later in the presentation. Go ahead, Liz. So this graph shows the breakout of how that funding is distributed. The vast majority, as you can see, is what we refer to as PSH, permanent supportive housing. In recent years, this is relatively, in the HUD world, a newer type of program. Rapid rehousing, or RRH, has been added, and we've been increasing the amount of that we've been applying for. I think we are going to go into a little more description later of these project types, but just to give you a brief overview, permanent housing, which rapid and permanent supportive housing, RRH and PSH, are considered permanent housing. And permanent housing is defined as community-based housing without a designated length of stay. That's not true, is it? Permanent supportive housing does not have it. Yeah, permanent supportive housing does not have a designated length of stay. And it's for formerly homeless individuals and families, and for them to live as independently as possible. So they are to receive supportive services if they need it, but we're charged with kind of giving people the lightest touch possible for them to be as independent and stable as possible.
And in permanent supportive housing, folks might live in a congregate setting. So live all together. Everybody has their own apartment, but it's in one apartment building with 20 or 50 units, and support services are on site. Or folks might live in a scattered site model throughout the community. And then services come to them, or they go to an office. So you can have, for permanent supportive housing, we have both models in Connecticut. We have far more scattered site units in the state, but we do have congregate permanent supportive housing as well.
So transitional housing is designed to provide homeless individuals and families with interim stability and support to successfully move from homelessness towards permanent housing. Transitional housing may be used to cover the costs of up to 24 months of housing with accompanying supportive services. Program participants must have a lease or a sublease and an occupancy agreement. No, that's not relevant. The CAN, you'll see that that's a very small percentage of the funding that we've received, and CAN stands for Coordinated Access Network. That helps us to prioritize people for housing. They assist in assessment, and based on assessment, referral to the program that fits the individual or family's needs. We have a small amount of supportive services only funds, which allows recipients and sub-recipients to provide services only, as the name says, to individuals and families not residing in housing operated by the recipient. We have HMIS funding, also homeless management information systems. Funds under this component may be used only by excuse me, the HMIS lead for, and they can use it for leasing a structure in which the HMIS operates, for operating the structure, and for covering other costs related to establishing, operating, and customizing the continuum of cares, HMIS, homeless management information systems. Excuse me. Other recipients and sub-recipients may not apply for funds under the HMIS component. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that slide. Hold on just a second. Excuse me. So the key COC responsibilities are listed here. As you'll see throughout the presentation, COCs have specific responsibilities required of them in order to achieve the goals of preventing and ending homelessness, such as monitoring, submitting materials in the annual Continuum of Care competition for funding, using the homeless management information system for data, and creating a coordinated entry system. Next slide. So this data on this slide, it includes the whole entire state, the BOSS Continuum of Care, Balance of State, and Opening Doors Fairfield County. So each year, it shows from 2007 through 2020. The data comes from the point in time count. So each year, we are charged with, in the last 10 days of January, counting sheltered and unsheltered persons who are considered to be homelessness by the HUD definition of homelessness. So sheltered homeless would be people in emergency shelters and transitional housing programs, and there are very few safe haven type programs. And then unsheltered people are people who are staying in a place not meant for human habitation. So these are the results of those numbers from 2007. And as you can see, we have had an overall reduction of homelessness of 35% since 2007. Next slide. So this is another graphic on the CT-BOSS, just the CT-BOSS point in time count. It shows a comparison of the two most recently completed point in time counts. So the 2021 numbers are still being finalized. So it just shows 2020 and 2019. the numbers show the number of people in transitional housing remained the same. The number of unsheltered people declined, and the number of people in emergency shelters rose slightly. So this all led to an overall reduction of 54 people from 2019 to 2020. Next slide. System performance measures. I think we'll go more into system performance measures later, but this is another data set that HUD has asked us to track, and it's relatively new. It maybe started 5 to 6 years ago that they've asked us to look at our whole system. So for a long time now, we've been counting, have charged with counting the point in time. So that's a simple number of people who experience homelessness on one date, one night out of the year. System performance measures really look at the whole system and look at all of the projects in our HMIS system and tell us how we're doing as a whole. So the measures, as you see, are length of time homeless, the extent to which people are exiting our projects to permanent housing, the extent to which people return to homelessness. The number of homeless persons is included in that data set. Jobs and income growth, they look at income growth for CoC projects in particular. And then they also look at the number of people who enter our system or who become homeless for the first time. HUD is obviously looking for improvements in these metrics year over year, and that's a large part of what our CoC score is based upon, this data, and the percentage of our score that depends on this increases every year. Core components of the CT homeless service system. Next slide. Another poll. Let me see. I'm going to get the next poll. Okay, what role do coordinated access networks, or CANs, what they call them at CT Boss, play? Do they assess persons experiencing homelessness? Do they refer persons experiencing homelessness? Do they provide case management services for people in permanent housing? Do they provide canned goods, or all of the above? Just wait a few seconds to give everyone a chance to answer. All right, I think I'm going to close it out and share results. So the winner, the highest percentage of people said refer persons experiencing homelessness to appropriate resources, which is true. Really, the two are assessment of persons experiencing homelessness and referring persons to appropriate resources are the two correct answers. All right, stop results share. Next slide. All right, now we tell you more about the system. Core components of the system. So 211 is the front door to the homeless services system. It's where people call to get help. 211 is funded, excuse me, it's a United Way of Connecticut program funded by DOH, Department of Housing. And for more information on the 211 system, please go to the links to the links on this slide. Next slide. This slide shows you an overview of the CAN system, or Coordinated Access Network. That's what CAN stands for. So in 2009, Congress passed the Hearth Act, which significantly changed the requirements for the COC. Among the changes was a requirement that every COC implement a coordinated entry system. So many words that mean something when you're familiar with HUDs and don't. So when homeless funding through HUD, COC funding first became available back in 1993, there was no way at any given time to tell like who all the whole of people who needed help, the whole of people who were experiencing homelessness, what specifically they needed. So there was no assessment system, which programs had vacancies, and what each program's eligibility criteria were. So each program set up its own intake system. They may have wait lists of their own. They may have their own, they did have their own criteria for entry. And each would make their own decisions about who they did and did not want to serve. So each worker really would have to build a list of contacts at housing projects. And each time there was a client in a housing crisis, you as a worker would have to call around to all your contacts, figure out if anyone could help the client. And in time, a lot of workers just really learned what programs were willing to work with somebody with, for instance, less than 12 months clean and sober, who may not be the most compliant with any kind of treatment, and most honestly weren't. So it was not a very efficient system. It was not a system that helped those people who were the most vulnerable, who were coming to our doors, right? So the people who were most likely to get help were those who had case managers who had been around a while and knew the system and had the contacts and were very good at their jobs and very good advocates for their clients. Or individuals experiencing homeless themselves who were the best self-advocates and could jump through a lot of hoops, background checks, drug screens, credit checks, all of that kind of thing, so that they could get help. Or we used to, or like some homeless providers used to coach people, to tell them what to say. I have schizophrenia, but I know I have a provider and I take my meds exactly as I'm prescribed them. I see my provider, my mental health provider all the time. And that's the way you're going to get housing, right? Is by saying how compliant you are with any kind of treatment that's offered and provided to you. Excuse me. So now with the coordinated access networks, we have a way better system. We have a system and it is way better. So this graphic shows you what CANs do. So it gives us a way to know what programs exist in our areas and what each provides, what population each serves, and where there are vacancies. It ensures that people who need help know to call 211. It uses a standardized assessment system to determine what people need. And it's charged with helping as many people as possible to tap all available resources to avoid going to shelter or being on the streets. It keeps a by name. Hello, Claudette?
I had a comment with how the system is run. I've been homeless myself, so I've been in that CAN system. And what I found was within the homeless shelters, if you were not favorable with a caseworker, they wouldn't necessarily bid for you. And you had no control over that. And some of them would deliberately bring that period of time to where you're supposed to exit the shelter and you still end up homeless based on someone's personal feeling, how they feel towards you. And also 211 were not very helpful to me. Everything I was sent to, no one could help. And once in the housing placement, yes, that's okay. But I feel that when you've been housed, the services need to continue where you're checking in on the clients, or some of them who are vulnerable, just to make sure they're okay, they're paying their bills, they're paying their part of the rent, because some of them just don't know what to do from what not to do. So I feel even though it's a nice system, it can be tweaked here and there. And I only know that some of the caseworkers don't bid for their clients, because I know people who are caseworkers who go to those CAN meetings, and where my name came up, in fact, for me, the other person was advocating for me. And that doesn't make sense, you know, and things like that shouldn't happen, but it does.
Yeah, Claudette, I'm so sorry you had that experience, but unfortunately, even though we have a system, and it is a better system than what used to exist, there's for sure room for improvement, and there's absolutely human error, for lack of a better word, that comes into play in advocacy, or human bias also that unfortunately comes into play. Yeah, some of what we put in place is to try to mitigate that, to try to avoid that, but there's for sure room for growth. Absolutely.
Yeah, a little bit more equity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would encourage, you know, folks to, you know, provide feedback to agencies. Every agency has a grievance process.
That doesn't work.
What's that?
In the shelter, it doesn't work.
Okay.
If you file a grievance, like, they're going to find reasons to discharge you. Or some shelters, I should say, not all of them. So file a grievance against the shelter. They're surely not going to bid for you, and they'll work towards you reaching your 60 days and being exited into homelessness again. And I've seen it happen.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. And I know that that's not a final answer by any means, but there's a grievance process with an agency. Then there's a further process with, depending on who the funder might be, you can also grieve at the CAN level, and you can grieve at the COC level. So there are, while I'm giving a bureaucratic response, I'm not saying that's going to solve this. I do encourage people.
No, that's good to know the process. It's good to know the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm again, like Shannon, I'm sorry that was your experience. And
that's okay. You live and learn, because like through that, I became a housing at New Haven. So I have a voice now for those who don't have a voice.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We're very happy to have you here and working in our system, for sure. Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Claudette, I just want to, as Liz and Shannon said, you know, we're really sorry that you had that experience, and really encourage, we do have a whole grievance process through the agencies. If you're not comfortable with that, you can go, you know, to the CAN, you can go to BOSS, depending on the funding, you can even go to the agencies that fund the programs. But the other thing is, all of this stuff, the grievance and all of the policies are on the CTCAN website. So I hear that you're an advocate for other folks now, which is fantastic. So just wanted to point you to where to find that, those resources, so that if, and hopefully that doesn't happen, something similar happens in the future, you know where to reach out to get the resources.
Say that again, Alice.
Resources is always helpful.
Say that again, where the resources, where the policies are.
It's on the CT BOSS website.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple
Thank you
other.
so much for that information.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Claudette. A couple other words on this CAN system overview. Through the system we have now, we have an assessment where we try to prioritize those who've been homeless the longest and have the most intensive need, like, again, trying to level the system and take out bias. And we're always working on improving that tool as well. And I think we may change it possibly within the next year or so. And then the CAN works together to find creative solutions to get and keep people housed, especially people with lots of barriers. Next slide. Core components. We mentioned before the HMIS system. It's a HUD requirement for COC and ESG programs to use this program. This system was not a requirement until 2004. Before that, there was really no comprehensive database to account for who was using the system for how long, how often they came back, whether or not they got housed, outcomes. In fact, I wasn't in homeless services when things began, but I worked with people who were, and they used to say for the point in time count, like HUD would still ask for this information before they gave you some of the funding. And back in the day, and maybe in the 1990s or in the early 2000s, HUD would ask how many homeless people are in your system, or how many people are experiencing unsheltered. And they would go around the conference table of all the providers and say, what do you think? What do you think? I think 200 sounds good. What did we say last year? And it was really not based in fact at all. So now we do have this data system, and we have the point in time system, which both go towards using real information, right? Not just guesstimates on what the state of affairs is for homelessness in our state. So we have this great collection of data. Again, with many of the other systems, there's always room for improvement, but it's much improved since where it was. And we use this data for many different things. It's very valuable in helping us understand who we're serving and what the outcomes of the services are. You can open up, for instance, an HMIS record for one individual and see someone's entire history of homelessness, programs, entry and exits back to 2004. We use the data to know who gets housed, who doesn't, who returns to homelessness. We use it for income. We use it to look at individual projects and who's doing really well and what projects are struggling. Our partners at CCH receive the HMIS grant, and they manage the HMIS database for the whole state. There's a link on the slide for more information on the HMIS system.
Yeah, and I would do a little plug. They have lots and lots of trainings. Nutmeg it does the trainings for CCH, and they do a really good job. They're there to answer your questions. They'll respond to help. If you email them to the help desk, they'll respond. So I just encourage folks to ask questions.
I'm going to try to go quickly through some of these slides. So I talked a little bit about component types before. I talked about PSH. Rapid rehousing provides quick, it's also considered permanent housing. So you're not considered homeless when you live in rapid rehousing. It provides quick access to housing through rental assistance and supportive services. You're reevaluated regularly to assess ongoing needs. And you're limited to less than 12 months in CT BOSS, but exceptions are possible. Transitional housing is up to 24 months, and then those are the other core components. Next slide. We relatively recently again received youth housing demonstration project funding. There was a special award for this process. So this housing is for youth aged 18 to 24. And you can see the categories here for that funding. The projects in this category started in late 2018. Next slide. And then we also have had special bonus NOFAs or competitions for funding for domestic violence. So we recently received some large awards for those types of housings in our COC as well. Next slide. So there are more other core components of the COC that are not funded by CT BOSS or not funded by COC funding. There's prevention and diversion, which occurs at the CAN level via 211. They're essential parts of our comprehensive system for preventing and ending homelessness. Again, they're not funded by COC funding. So prevention funding obviously prevents homelessness at the beginning of a housing crisis. We can divert people, use other resources to help them get housing in some other way, than entering one of our homeless system providers or an emergency shelter. Helps people identify immediately housing arrangements and connects people with services and financial assistance. More components not funded by CT BOSS. Outreach. Outreach really focuses on people who are not sheltered. We help them to, outreach workers help them to engage in services, provide housing navigation, and some case management. The funding stream, projects for assistance in transition from homelessness, or PATH funds, provides a significant amount of outreach funding throughout the state. They serve clients with serious mental illness, including those with co-occurring substance use disorder. And there's one PATH project per CAN. This is funded by SAMHSA and administered by DEMAS, by Alice's organization. Some communities have outreach programs in addition to PATH, and actually most communities do now have funding through the coronavirus stimulus funds. Department of Housing received funding for outreach and has distributed additional outreach funding statewide. Next slide.
Did I go the wrong way? Oops, sorry.
There you go. So emergency shelter is also not funded by CT BOSS. It's a short-term place, ideally, for individuals and families with nowhere else to stay, meets basic needs, and different shelters have different capabilities. Some provide food, as some provide case management. Not every shelter is able to provide case management, some do. And they're funded primarily by HUD ESG funding, or through the CT Department of Housing. And there are some other private sources. There are a number of churches and other sources that fund shelters throughout Connecticut. Then there are COVID-specific housing resources, and that funding comes through Department of Housing as well. There's FEMA-funded hotel motel beds to help deconcentrate shelters in this time where people are supposed to be 6 feet apart. Unite CT is a new program that provides rental and utility assistance to approved Connecticut households financially impacted by COVID. And then, of course, the COVID ESG CARES Act provides funding for these resources that are listed on the slide. Key partners within the COC. There are many different people, organizations that play a really critical role in ending homelessness. We appreciate all of those providers. We're not going to try to list them all today, but we're going to focus on those most directly involved in the COC, and we're always looking to increase involvement by other sectors.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with our friends at HUD, and I say friends because we have a really great relationship with our field office in Hartford, and we feel very lucky. They're very responsive. They're great partners. They're the second listed. They are the SNAPS office, and they're in DC, and they develop the rules, the scoring criteria. Again, you're going to keep hearing us say NOFA for the notice of funding availability. They score the application. They develop the rules, the notices, the federal policies that we all have to follow. And then they provide guidance to the field office. So the HUD Hartford field office, we gave the phone number. They do the work of making sure that your grants are executed. They will field questions, though sometimes they have to throw it down to the SNAPS folks. And they provide assistance, and they monitor, and they are coming to monitor soon. So sometime actually in the next couple of weeks, they're going to let folks know who they're monitoring. And so it's just important when they're coming out. So if you're going to be an agency who's going to be monitored, that you review the monitoring standards and guidelines, which also are on our website, so that you're just prepared for what's going to happen. And if you're part of CT BOSS and you're going to be monitored, feel free to give us a ring. We're happy to chat with you about that. Shannon, along with some of our other colleagues, actually go out to do monitoring ahead of time to let agencies know where maybe they have some challenges, where they aren't maybe following the HUD regulations, so that when HUD does come out, they're prepared for that monitoring visit. So Shannon doesn't want to be called expert, but she's really good at that. So, so if you call me, I'm going to tell you to call Shannon. But,
Claudette and
we will find someone to help you.
I'm sorry. I think Claudette and Alice might have something they want to add.
Oh, okay.
Really quickly.
Thank you. Really quickly. When are they going to turn up unexpectedly and monitor? Because I feel that that would be really beneficial to see how things are really run.
That's an interesting take on it. You may not find a majority of people agreeing with you on that one, but you know what? They give you a heads up before they come. They
at least a month,
let you
right?
know they're coming.
Yeah.
With that time that they know you're coming, from my experience, they're running around getting all their files together, making sure all the rooms are in compliance, making sure that all the clients know that they're coming and don't mess up. So I'm saying that if someone was to show up unexpectedly, you're going to get a true vision of how things are run.
Yeah, I hear you. And unfortunately, that's not the way they do it, or fortunately, depending on your perspective. But honestly, the monitoring, which we'll go through that we do as CT boss, is much more thorough than the HUD monitoring. HUD will pick a couple areas, components that they're going to look at. So even, hopefully you can all hear me. It says my internet connection is unstable. Even when we come out and we give people notice, there's always a finding, and we're not going out to get people, because there's a ton of regulations to follow in these HUD COC programs, right? But we're coming out to look at everything, see where things line up, are in alignment with both CT BOSS policies and HUD policies, and to give people guidance on how to comply better. Because everyone does, I mean, deep down, everybody does want to do well, but there are so many things pulling people in different directions that it's sometimes challenging to do. Yeah. Alice, you wanted to?
I was just going to say, since the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and the Department of Housing get a lot of funding directly from HUD, and then we give it out to some of our funded providers, often we are high on the list of probability to be monitored. So we may be monitored this year. We have not been notified yet. But what that also entails is HUD will come out to DEMIS and do some of the monitoring. Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, DEMIS, they do some of the monitoring. Initially, they're going to do it virtually, but they do monitor the departments. The department's part of the work, and then they will go out, or in this case, monitor remotely the subrecipient or the partner agency that we've funded through our process. So for the ones that are for the programs that are funded through DEMIS or the Department of Housing, we provides the services. So I just wanted to say that for folks who get DEMIS funding through HUD funding through the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, you may get notified from Lisa Callahan, my colleague who's on the phone or on this call, or myself or our other colleague Brenda Earl about the visit. So
great, that's helpful. Thanks, Alice. So another key partner, the steering committee. You hear us talk about the steering committee all the time. What does the steering committee do? So the steering committee coordinates the strategies to end homelessness. So the idea of the steering committee is that it's folks from all, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, from the government, from private agencies, from not-for-profits, to come together and really make a plan. So not just a plan for the HUD funding, not just for the 46 million, but for Steve DeLella from DOH to come in and say, hey, I have this funding, for Alice Minervino with us to say, hey, this is working, this isn't working, can we put our heads together? So it's a great group of people who come together to really plan to are we going to end homelessness in Boss and in the state? We don't have as many resources as we'd like, so we really prioritize and decide how we want to spend the resources. The steering committee is in charge of making sure that all the projects in Boss are evaluated and evaluated every year. And there's a scoring and ranking process, as Shannon mentioned, and the steering committee in the end votes on that. And then the steering committee provides direction and tells us what to do. So Shannon and I, with a host of other folks, work for Housing Innovations, and we staff the steering committee. So we look to the 4 chairs to provide direction and guidance for the work that we do. All right, another poll. So this poll is, do you know who represents your CAN on the CT Boss Steering Committee? And there's no shaming. There's just no problem with what the answer is.
No.
It's an accepting crowd.
So, all right, give a couple more seconds. Okay, so 58% of people said yes, and 42% of people said no, they do not know who represents them.
Okay, well, we're going to try to, on the next couple slides, we will shed some light. So not this slide, the next slide. So you have to just wait 1 second because we have this one first. So this is the first slide again. Second one's going to be your answer. This is the Reaching Home and CT Boss Steering Committee. So just to complicate things, we have the CT Boss Steering Committee who reports to the Reaching Home Coordinating Committee. That's fairly new, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years. And we already talked about there are four chairs. I'm not going to read all the people, but we have Alice with us today, and they do such a fantastic job. And it's really a whole other job for them because it's an awful lot of work. Then we have CAN reps that we're going to talk about in the next slide. We have government folks. We have DOL just came on, right? Thanks, Rob. So we're very excited, and we're so excited because it's such an important group to have together that we're really excited to see how we can support each other, because employment is such a huge issue in our state. And you can see the host of other folks. Steering committee meets once a month, but there's work that's done in between the meetings, and all of these folks are really just critical players to working towards end homelessness in our state. All right, here you go. So if you said yes, you can see if you were right. If you said no, maybe you were thinking of one of these people. So these are the CAN representatives for CT Boss. So Northwest is Litchfield, Torrington, Waterbury. MMW is listed out. Everything else, I think, what else isn't obvious? The Central CAN is Bristol, New Britain, Southington, and Plainville. And Eastern is Norwich, New London, Wyndham, Putnam. And it was Northeast and Southeast, and they came together. And then ODFC has their own CAN. They have a Fairfield County CAN. So if these folks know that you might reach out to them and say, hey, I have an issue. Can you bring this to the steering committee? And these are your representatives. But all steering committee meetings are open. If you go, I know we're really plugging our website. If you go to the CT Boss website, you can sign yourself up for emails. And again, everything we do is open and public, and we love to have folks join the steering committee, be part of our steering committee meetings, which again, open to all.
And now, maybe possible silver lining with COVID, all of the meetings are virtual, so it may be easier for you to attend if you're curious about what happens at those, because it's all done by Zoom right now.
Yep, it does make it a little easier to jump on, but we'd love to have you. So what do CAN representatives do? Once again, now we're giving folks who already have a job another job, but they're fantastic and really work hard at being the liaison from the steering committee to the communities. They are charged with making sure that their CAN membership or anybody in their community has access to and knows what's happening at the steering committee. So again, our minutes are on the website, but they also are charged with making sure that minutes go out to folks, that people know that we vote at the steering committee. So what we do is we present an idea have a discussion, and then a month later, we vote on it. So in the interim, we ask the CAN representatives to go back to their CANs and ask members of the community what they think about the decision, so that the CAN representative really is representing the thoughts and feedback from the CANs. They provide data for planning purposes. They outreach to providers who may not have, who may have some issues with data quality, and they help with the point in time count. So they do a lot. Refer back to that list. I can provide contact. Well, in fact, contact information is also on the website for those folks. So I really do encourage you, feedback, concerns, complaints, you want to hear more about what's going on, to reach out to those local folks and to come to a steering committee meeting and let us know. So again, can't say it enough. Everyone's welcome. You don't have to play a certain role or be a certain, have certain responsibilities. Just come see what we're about. And like Shannon said, it's kind of nice now because you can be in your jammies and come to a steering committee meeting. Now, I will tell you, when we go do it live, sometimes we have donuts. So one day when we're all together again, I would encourage you to come live and eat donuts with us. So we're talking about some of the stuff that's happening at BOSS. So we are involved with the HUD Race Equity Demonstration Project. And what we're really looking for here is to have more people with lived expertise be involved in the steering committee, be involved in other committees, be part of decision-making processes. And so we are currently working with the Consumer Leadership Involvement Program, which we're going to talk about, to recruit and have additional people with lived experience so that their voices can be heard. And so they can be part, again, of decision-making processes and help to end homelessness in BOSS. So we call it CLIP, although John Merz, one of our co-chairs, I don't know if he doesn't like the name or if he just thinks that we should have more input on the name, but he always says if someone comes up with a better name, we can rename it, but it's CLIP for right now. And the goal of the process is to improve the quantity and quality of involvement of persons with lived experience. So not just that there's one person who comes to one meeting, but that there are a group of people who are involved, who have leadership positions. This particular project is being coordinated by CSH. They've already done focus groups, and we're coming into the spring. There are going to be steering committee trainings. They are in the midst of hiring a fellow to co-lead the project. And they will be recruiting more people, again, with lived experience to ensure that we have a broad range of voices at the table. All right, we've got more.
I was just saying, the fellow actually starts today or tomorrow.
Oh, it's wow, hot off the press, Alice.
So yeah, so I just that will be started soon. So that's exciting.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Liz, what does CSH stand for? There's a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Corporation for Supportive Housing.
I think there might be a slide.
Steve, that slide. Thank you. We could have a game each time. Each time there's an acronym not written out. See, Alice, we're at Demas. We're at Alice's home. What does Demas do? Well, Demas obviously has a huge goals and tasks and things they do on their own. But as it relates to the work we do here, they have a really important role also. They are the collaborative applicant. So they actually are the folks that are charged with applying to HUD through the COC process. So they have a big role there. They contract and oversee housing innovations and CCH. They are, as Alice mentioned, I think they've done some consolidation. So I think it used to be like 60 grants they oversee. And then HUD actually allows you to say, we're going to put this grant with this grant, this grant. You still have the same number of units and beds and people, but they have 40 or 50 grants. They administer the outreach program PATH. They provide behavioral health services, and most important, they give us Alice Minervino to be one of our chairs. So we just talked about this. Demas, as the collaborative applicant, is designated to compile and submit the application and to apply for planning funds on behalf of the COC during the competition. So we keep Demas busy. DOH is an important partner. So Steve Dellella, who we keep mentioning, is one of the co-chairs. They are the lead for the YHDP projects, the Youth Homeless Demonstration Projects Program. Yeah. They are the Rapid Rehousing grantee. So they get the funds that come in from HUD, and then they have service providers that are the subrecipients. They provide a CAN staff. They fund 211, they administer ESG, they have moving on vouchers, and the LEI, which is a huge new emergency rental assistance program. And I'll do a plug for BOSS COVID hours Thursday, April 1st from 11 to 12. Dawn Parker from Unite CT, who housed out of DOH, will be presenting on this really important program that has robust funding. So we're eager to get some updates from her. Of course, CCH we work really closely with because they're the HMIS lead. They're the folks running the point in time count. So they have lots and lots of important responsibilities as it relates to that. They submit the system performance measures that Shannon talked about. So we've worked really closely with them this year to provide the most comprehensive and accurate data possible. And those system performance measures go to HUD. And then as part of the application process to HUD, part of the NOFA, we need to tell HUD how well we did. And so data are always important because they allow us to plan, but they also, in this bureaucratic kind of way, give us points on the application, and more points and the higher score, as Shannon mentioned earlier, means that we have access to more funding. So it's really, that's a really important process. CCH has great trainings. I'd encourage you to go to their website and see what they do. They have youth engagement and diversion programs also. Be mindful of the time, I see. All right, we have another question. Another poll. So where can you provide suggestions to enhance HMIS? So where would you go if you had some feedback to provide?
CT BOSS steering committee, CAN meetings, HMIS steering committee meetings, or all of the above. Wait a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to share the results. So 54% said HMIS steering committee meeting, 50% said all of the above. It really is all of the above. If you know a representative on the HMIS steering committee, by all means, send your information there, but it really could be any of these areas. True.
Great. So we'll talk a little bit about the HMIS steering committee. So they have an important role because they're in charge of setting up the guiding principles for how HMIS is goes and procedures, and those need to be approved, reviewed, approved, decided upon. They establish the minimal data elements to be collected by HMIS. They establish data quality benchmarks, and they're really just in charge of making sure that the HMIS system is working. So if you would like to know more about what they do, I would go to the CCH website and see when they're meeting. They also are meeting through Zoom, so maybe a good time to hear about what they're doing as well. Other key partners, CSH, see there it is, Corporation for Supportive Housing. Monique Price-Taylor is one of our fantastic 4 chairs. So we rely on her for her wealth of knowledge, just like the other chairs. But see, what is CSH? It's a national not-for-profit. It's got a Connecticut office, and they promote supportive housing through training, lending, consulting, and policy reform. And they are in charge of coordinating CT BOSS CLIP, the consumer project for BOSS. Another great partner, ACT CT. So that's Advancing CT Together, has had a name change in the last year or two. And John Merce is, again, another fantastic co-chair. We rely heavily on his knowledge. But ACT is an umbrella agency that encompasses 3 programmatic divisions: AID CT, CT Association for Human Services, and CT Center for Harm Reduction. And I'll do another plug. Our friends from Connecticut Association for Human Services will also be presenting during the BOSS COVID hours on a range of their services, but most importantly, and focusing on what's going on right now with folks getting stimulus checks, how can we connect people experiencing homelessness with banks? So a really important topic. So join us if you can for that. ACT also provides a range of services, and ACT is also the rapid rehousing rent administrator. So they're the ones who are cutting checks to landlords and making sure folks are getting paid. That's us. And like I said, we staff CT Boss. We monitor projects. We evaluate the renewals every year. We coordinate the HUD COC application. We work very closely, like I mentioned, with CCH, and we provide trainings and technical assistance. And this is our team. And you're always welcome to reach out to any of us, and we will try to help out. And if we can't help out, we really feel like our job is to find resources for you. So please reach out and we'll see what we can do. So project roles. So we wanted to make sure that folks you're going to hear us throw words around recipient and subrecipient. So when there's a project, the grant recipients can be government. So as we were talking about, Alice has, Demas has, they are the grantee, DOH may be the grantee, or it may be a nonprofit, a Columbus House, a BH Care. They actually may be the recipient themselves. And they will execute the grant with HUD and get the funding. You're in charge of running the whole project. And then you're in charge of managing the sub-recipients. So if you, and we're gonna look, we have some, we'll show you some model types, but if you are in charge of the grant, you really are in charge of making sure that everything is happening the way it should, even though you may have sub-recipients. So you're in charge of the whole project, and you're in charge of watching to make sure the sub-recipients are doing what they need to be doing. You're in charge of drawing down funds. You can pay for what you're doing. You're going to submit the APR, which is the annual I say it wrong. Yeah. To make sure, and that's where you report on how's your performance for the year, how many, it has questions on income and a variety of other things. You're going to submit amendment requests if you have any, and every year you have to do a project application, a technical submission, and provide renewal evaluation information. So it's a lot. Nonprofit subrecipients. So we were just talking about subrecipients. So they get money from the grantee. They might provide services to tenants. They might help with housing location. They may enter the data into HMIS and a range of other services. Nonprofit service providers, they receive funding, non-COC funding from Demas. They may provide services to tenants. They might help with housing location. They also might enter data into HMIS and perform other duties as needed. And nonprofit housing providers, they administer rental assistance, which means that they have to determine income, rent calculations, do the housing quality standards inspection, rent reasonableness, and lease execution. And they might also help with housing location. Then we look at the local mental health authorities, and they provide a wealth of services. They are state funded. Some are operated by Demas and others are private not-for-profits. And in some projects, they are the primary service source, and others, it's actually the housing provider. So this is just a sample project. It might look like this. So HUD's going to give DOH the money. DOH is the grantee. And then the subrecipient, so this is a rapid rehousing project. So ACT is the housing provider, like I said, cuts the check. And then we have a subrecipient service provider for Hartford, and maybe a subrecipient provider for New Haven. So a project might look like this. There are other ways they can.
I have a
look. We
question.
have
Alice,
yeah.
or maybe someone else can answer this. I assume that if you have these contracts, they've got to be signed also in the state by the Attorney General. You guys have a contracts division that does that like we do. And then of course you're subject to whatever state auditors might find.
Alice, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yes, we have contracts with all of our subrecipient providers. We also are subject to the state audit system. Lisa Callahan, I know, who's on the phone, is intimately aware with the state auditors because they have been auditing this program for 3 or 4 years now. We have come a long way since their initial visit and findings, but until there are no findings for a number of years, or very little findings for a number of years, we will continue to be audited by them. So for the folks who have not been contacted by Lisa regarding the single state audit, that's what they call it, you may be up on the chopping, I don't want to say chopping block. You may be up on the to be called list in the future, because we do have to get information from our subrecipients for the audit.
Well, I assume you encounter some of the same challenges we do when we attempt to get contracts signed by the Attorney General's office, right? I'm sure you probably deal with the same kind of frustration that we often deal with as well. Even though they're even though they're federal funds, for some reason, the Attorney General still has to sign off on them.
Yep. Yeah, we have some contracts in my inbox that are to be signed still, to be questioned. Kind of a lengthy process, but we do keep it moving with our contracts unit.
Great. And Shannon, and I'm just going to let folks on their own look at this because I'm trying to be mindful of the time because we're moving along.
All right. This is me, right?
Yes.
So responsibilities of COC projects. And again, like we're down to a few minutes left. So there's going to be a lot of material here that we don't cover. Feel free to come back and look at the slides. And there are whole trainings on monitoring. Monitoring is a topic coming up too. So you can look at those resources on the CTBOS website as well. System performance measure. I did talk about this before, so I'm going to skip to the next slide. The next poll, let's see, how can your project help improve system performance? I'm going to launch this. So again, if you can just look at these and respond, connect people with benefits or help them maintain benefits, connect people with employment services, help provide services and develop skills to maintain tenancy, periodically review project data for accuracy, facilitate moving on when someone is no longer in need of supportive services, or assist participants to quickly find, if appropriate, and move into housing, or all of the above. All right, I'm gonna end this and share results. So really all of the above. Yes, most people responded all of the above, and most people are very smart and correct on that. So thanks for participating in that. Next slide. Housing inventory count and the PIT count. I think we talked a little bit about the PIT count already. It's required annually of each COC nationally in the last 10 days of January who was experiencing homelessness on that one night. And the HIC, the housing inventory count, is an annual inventory that goes along same timing as the point in time where HUD asks us all of our homeless beds that we have available, from shelter, transitional housing, rapid, permanent supportive housing, and safe havens, or other permanent housing designated for homeless people nationally. So again, all the PIT counts are still going on for this year, and we will submit that at the end of April if things go as scheduled. Next slide. how SPM and HCPC data are used. They're used to evaluate performance. So it impacts, it was this past in 2019, 33% of our CoC NOFA score, and that percentage is growing, as I mentioned earlier. We evaluate project performance based on the data that's entered there. And both are used continuously to make system improvements. Look at the system critically, decide where resources are needed, where we can shift them out of one area to another area, and that type of a thing. We use it for strategic planning as well, to improve coordination among projects and among sectors. Next slide. Renewal evaluation. We do a renewal evaluation process each and every year, and it's part of, as we talked about before, scoring. We look at participant eligibility, all the requirements. We look at consumer surveys. Are people happy with the services they're receiving, satisfied with the services they're receiving? Are you spending all of the funding allocated to you? We look at occupancy. Are the beds full? Performance, again, exits to non-homeless destinations, increases in income, and there are penalties for late submission. I'm gonna go next slide. Typical renewal evaluation timeline. In the summer, the steering committee adopts criteria that you'll be evaluated on. In the fall, providers review your data, ensure all your data is correct, and then all year through, you can collect consumer surveys. Fall, providers submit the surveys. Winter, providers receive evaluation results, and you all have an opportunity to review, correct, and finalize your data. In the spring, the grievance committee meets if and when necessary, and the steering committee establishes corrective action threshold, or the score below which projects are in corrective action. In the summer, evaluation results are used to rank projects during the annual NOFA process. Monitoring, I think I'm going to skip through. There's whole presentations on monitoring, and I talked a little bit about it before, but suffice it to say that we choose a small percentage of projects every year to come out and monitor. You can look through the resources here to give you more information on what we monitor on. And the factors on which we choose what projects are to be monitored are: if you've never been monitored before, the size of your project, history of unresolved findings, poor evaluation scores, requests by the Connecticut field office, or complaints. Here, this is more resources. And then the next slide. Compliance, local requirements, we monitor on all these items as well. Just take a look at the monitoring guide on our website, and that will outline every single criteria that we will look at. There are some that are more appropriate for rapid or PSH, and the monitoring guide is clear on what particular metric applies to what type of project. So there you go, the tips for monitoring success.
Got lots and lots of information. So again, if you get your call from HUD, I encourage you to go to the website. Lauren and Shannon have put together really great resources, super comprehensive.
Yeah, next slide. Renewal applications. Every year we mentioned every project must submit a renewal application, and there's the timeline for that. And the next slide, we're going to skip that. Next slide, annual performance reports. All projects are required to submit an APR within 90 days after the project end date. There are instructions listed here. And then the next slide is a CT BOSS timeline, things that happen throughout the year. And I think there's additional helpful resources coming up.
So these are just great websites, places to look for information. Again, some of our partners' websites are here. And what else do we have? And then also, we wanted to list trainings.
We're always interested in knowing what your opinion is of what more information you need. So if you ever have a suggestion for training, please reach out to us and let us know. The CT Boss Gmail is a great place to reach us, or you have that slide with all of our information on it. Any questions? Will these slides be emailed out? I don't think they'll be emailed out, but they're on the website already. The slides are on the CT Boss website under the trainings page already, and we're going to post
they were emailed out last night.
Okay.
So if you're on the distribution list, you get it. If you aren't on the distribution list, then you can get it from the website. And when you're on the website, sign yourself up so that you're getting the emails.
Yeah. And the recording will be up within the next couple of days on the website. Any other questions? We have 1 minute. Thank you all. We know this was a ton of information to go through. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate your being here, and we appreciate you being involved in CT Boss COC. It's very much a collaborative effort.
And don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, concerns, comments. Our emails are listed on one of the pages. Very good. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Alice, for joining also. And thank you for all of you.